Welcome to Nobilis Erotica episode 326. I am your host, Nobilis Reed.
Hey, this is Oscar the Grouch, Private Eye from Polly Cooley's The Street. Nobilis Erotica is for adults only. It may contain adult language, situations, and lots of rumpy-pumpy. So if you're not an adult, scram!
Greetings, noble listeners. Today I'm bringing you the first of my Balticon recordings, and since I don't believe in saving the best for last, I'm sharing the Spec-Fic Erotica readings panel I held with Alessia Brio, Bliss Morgan, Sharpe and Bernie Mojzes. But before we get to that, I'd like to update you on the status of the Patreon campaign. Thanks to our generous patrons, we have gotten the first 2 stretch goals down, which allows us to pay both authors and voice talent for their work in bringing you these episodes. That's great, but of course I'd love to be able to do more. So check out the patreon.com/Nobilis page to see how things are going and maybe add your dollars to the pot. One of the things that's not mentioned there is that I'm going to pay someone to read slush for the podcast. I want to go beyond the few authors I know to solicit stories, but I really don't want to read slush. So having a little money to pay someone to do that will allow me to spread the net a little wider, maybe get some people I would not have otherwise known about. So, when this goes out for open submissions, you know I'm going to let you know about that. It's probably going to be fairly soon. And either if you write or if you know someone who does, you'll be able to send me a story and maybe get it in the podcast and maybe get paid for it. So, with that out of the way, let's have some stories, huh? Here we go. Door. It's not that we don't want anybody else to come in, we just don't want the sounds that will be made in here to be audible outside.
We want to save them. Keep them all for ourselves.
So,
undoubtedly.
My name is Nobilis Reed. I am the creator, host, and editor of the finest speculative fiction podcast in the known universe. I know it's the finest because it's the only one. I just had episode 300, the 325th episode, which is actually not numbered 325 because it's chapter 10 of a novel that I'm doing along. It's all
because of reasons.
Because of reasons. Right. Just had the 325th posting on the podcast today. So if you go to nobilis.libsyn.com, there's lots of audio smut to be found there.
Oh wow, what's that link though?
And to my left are 4 fine erotica writers who have who've agreed to come here and share some of their goodness with you. We'll let them introduce themselves because I'm lazy. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I am Alessia Brio. I am the editor of the Coming Together Charity Erotica series, and I also write. I used to write a lot more. Now I edit and publish a lot more. But you can find me at eroticanthology.com.
I am Bliss Morgan. I write erotica and an array of other things. You can find me on callmebliss.com. You can find me as Call Me Bliss on Twitter. And you can find me as Bliss Morgan on Google+.
I am Sharpe, and I am 56 years old, but I'm a newbie at this. So I really look forward to comments, suggestions. This will be my first time here, my first time reading erotica. My normal genre is poetry, nonfiction. So this is, again, a new dimension for me. Let's put it that way.
Pun intended.
I'm Bernie Mojzes. I am a writer of science fiction, fantasy, horror, erotica, or whatever happens.
Mash them together and see what squeezes out.
Yeah, that. I also edit Unlikely Story, which is an online magazine of science fiction, fantasy, horror, and whatever. And I just recently, as in this month, have this book out by Circlet Press called The Flesh Made World. the Flesh Made Word, which is all stories about erotica about writing. So it's all things like typewriters and fountain pens on flesh and things like that, which is
It's writer porn about writer porn.
Writer porn about writer porn.
This makes me so happy.
Also, if you get the paperback, there is a section in here, which Cecilia Tan came up with, to write your own smut into the book. And the first 5 people who do so will get a free critique.
Ooh,
Interesting.
neat.
Okay, so let's get to some readings. I am going to read from my personal one-author vanity project anthology called Quicksilver Bridges. This is a series of stories that are set in Chris Lester's Metamor City universe. It is a high-tech, high-magic location with all kinds of kinky possibilities that at first he didn't really explore much, but he set it up as a shared world, and I said, I'm going to write some stories for this. And he put them in his podcast, and he loved it, and I kept writing more. This story is from the second of those stories, and it's about an ambassador from the nation of his world where mummies come from. And they are, in fact, animated undead creatures that shuffle about. But in his world, they are scholars who are preserved in order to preserve their knowledge. And the more they move around, the more they decay. So they tend to keep very still. But this particular one, Master Aniket, has, instead of being preserved using the ancient techniques, has been plasticized. This is some of you may have heard of this process where the body tissues are replaced with plastic so that it is a perfect replica of the corpse. And because he's something of an ambassador from this country to Metamor. And in order to be a better ambassador, to be able to interact with people on a more meaningful level, he has had an enchantment cast on him which gives him a sense of touch, which he didn't have before. And he's finding that there are some side effects.
As they say.
This is actually the second scene in the story that I'm going to read for you. Or the beginning of it, anyways. We'll see how much time we have. Master Aniket, I presume. The woman did not look like a whore. She was dressed in a burgundy business suit, with a skirt drawn to mid-calf. Except for the lack of a headscarf, you could see women dressed this way in Cartis any day of the week. Only the ruby-colored pin in her lapel marked her as a member of the Sensualists Guild. She kept her hands at her side, offering not even the slight intimacy of a handshake. Neither did her waiting room look like a den of perversion. The walls were decorated with large paintings of tranquil landscapes, interspersed with long banners of colorful silk. The furniture was little different from the chairs and tables found in Dr. Kashar's office. A certificate hung on the wall with the guild's emblem, the only indication of what sort of work was practiced here. You are correct. She smiled and stepped away from the door. I am Amisi Basakil. Won't you please come in? Her dark hair was bundled in dozens of bright, tight-beaded braids. Her extremely dark skin and obsidian eyes reminded him of Arambi, but not of home, not the way Dr. Kashar had. She was not Karti. His first instinct was to distrust her, to see her as either invader or slave, but he tamped it down. Now was not the time to act on instinct. Her office was somewhat warmer in atmosphere than the waiting room. Instead of a desk, there was a pair of low couches set in one corner of the room, of the sort that could fold out into a futon bed. He imagined the need arose often. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled to overflowing with colorful titles. An entertainment console stood opposite, a wide screen flanked by speakers with many racks of discs. Alongside the console was a tall row of cabinets, something like a modern armoire. A small altar stood in one corner with an incense burner already ready but unlit. He sat in the center of one of the couches, cross-legged, with his hands draped over his knees. There was no other way to sit on such a low seat with any dignity. Amisi sat beneath him, in the center of the circle of heavy pile carpet. Thank you for coming, she said. It must be difficult for someone from your culture to come here. And what do you know of my culture? I watched the documentary about the ancient desert masters, she said, and Aniket winced. She hurried on past the gaff. And Dr. Kashar told me what she could and the particulars of your case. I can help you if you're willing to work with me. To what end? That depends on you. What do you want to work towards? I have been challenged, in the words of Dr. Kashar, to see what happens. Perhaps after I have done that, I will know the answer to your question, if there is one. Fair enough. So if you are willing to lead me through are you willing to let me lead you through some basic exercises? Anaket inclined his head in affirmation. Now, before we start, you should understand that I am not intending to cause you undue discomfort or emotional trauma. This should not be something you must endure. If you start feeling unsure or anxious, I want you to tell me immediately and we will stop the exercise. Likewise, if I feel that exercise needs a pause or stop, I expect you to follow my instructions. Do you agree to this? I do. Excellent. She unfolded herself, standing again about 2 meters from where he sat. I'm going to take off my clothes and I want you to watch me. Try to remain mindful of your thoughts and feelings while that is happening. The purpose of this exercise is for us to become more comfortable with each other in an intimate setting. That seems straightforward enough. It is. She smiled and slowly undid the buttons of her suit jacket, slipped it off her shoulders, and laid it on the side table. Her motions were neither seductive nor shy, but completely comfortable and matter-of-fact. Her loose white blouse came off with similar ease and confidence, joining the jacket in a half-folded, half-rumpled pile. Underneath, she wore a white brassiere with just a bit of lace around the edges. The skirt came free after undoing just one clasp. She held onto it rather than letting it fall to the floor, and stepped out of it as she stepped out of her sensible black flats, revealing white underpants that matched her bra. Anaket could appreciate her beauty. Clearly, she took very good care of her body and was a well-shaped woman besides. Her breasts and hips had the generous curves that he had appreciated when alive. He felt a sort of meditative state come over him, and sat quietly as she went about her task. The clasp between her breasts came free easily in her fingers, and her brassiere slid off her shoulders and into the pile. Her full breasts hung a little lower without its support, but in spite of their size, did not droop appreciably. She slipped her underpants down over her posterior, let them drop down to her ankle, then bent her knee to bring them up to her hand. Her vulva was trimmed, but not completely shaved. She stood for a moment, letting him take in the sight of her naked body, then knelt down in her spot on the floor, with her hands loosely in her lap. Now tell me what you feel. You understand, he said, that while I have a complete set of internal organs, none of them function. I am inert. Yes, I do. Then what I feel is a product of pure mind. I feel none of the stirrings that mortal man would have felt. I do, however, enjoy the sight of your body. You are a lovely woman. Thank you. Do you miss those stirrings? No. For the most part, they are a distraction for my purpose. But please go on. I do speculate on what it would be like to touch you. Would you like to do that? Yes, but not yet. Fair enough. Do you have any other thoughts or feelings? I wish you were Carti. I mean no disrespect, but I am most comfortable with my own people. Hopefully that is a barrier you and I can overcome. Anaket gave a slight nod, perhaps. If you're ready, I'd like you to take off your clothes as well. Will you tell me what you think? If you like. Honestly. Mr. Anaket, I will never be anything but completely honest with you. Very well. Anaket rose from the couch and undressed, starting with the top of his head and working his way down. The dark hood of fear closed around him, but as the concealing fabric fell away, he saw no revulsion in Amisi's face. No pity, no fear. No desire either, but there was curiosity and perhaps a little pride. When he was done, he returned to his cross-legged seat. The bit we didn't mention was that he's covered in bandages like a mummy. I have some questions, she said. Would it be okay to ask you? He made a circular gesture with his hand. Yes. Why do you cover yourself with bandages? For one, long strips of linen are the traditional garb of my order. For the other, I find it convenient for people who see me to assume that I am the victim of some kind of accident. It is less horrific than to go without. I could use a disguise spell or simply wear a long cloak with a deep hood, but those methods can fail, and I find there is comfort in daily ritual of wrapping myself. I see. Another thing came to mind. Why don't you squeak when you move? I use a powder to lubricate my skin where it meets. It helps keep down the wear and tear on my body. Among my brothers, friction is one of the greatest dangers. Gradually, over the course of centuries, it is what destroys us, so we move as little as possible. One of my purposes in trying out this new embalming technique is to allow us more opportunity for movement. She nodded. One last question, and if it makes you uncomfortable, feel free not to answer. Completely honest, Miss Basakil. Of course. She smiled and gave a quick nod. Why do you have an erection? And I think I'll leave it there.
Are we just jumping from one to
We'll
the
just
other?
jump from one to the other, introduce it or not, whatever.
Okay, this is from a short story called Past Perfect. It is about coworkers, and I'll just let it go from there. Denise spun and stepped toward Jackie, her shoulders squared and mind blazing. You think you can just jerk people around this way? Make them do your biddings because you're so fucking perfect? Well, cross me off your list of acolytes, Miss Manso. I don't play that way. Jackie sighed, but she stood her ground with a defiant expression on her face. Denise fought the urge to slap it, to make her feel the sting of anger that threatened to escape its bounds. Her hands twitched at her side. I just wanted... Jackie reached out, her fingers brushing Denise's forearms. The touch sparked the release of pent-up emotion, and Denise wrenched her arm away, unintentionally catching the underside of Jackie's chin with the back of her hand. She watched in shock as Jackie's head snapped back, colliding with the wall. Before she could speak, though, Jackie righted herself and shook it off. She looked sideways at Denise, eyes narrowed and snarled. Go if you're going. I won't try to stop you. Why? Why? Jackie rolled her eyes. Because even though this is my house, and even though I invited you here, I can still be charged with battery. Because we work in the same office. Because... No, why the dinner/housewarming party story? Why the elaborate ruse? Sighing, Jackie slumped against the wall. I didn't lie about the party, you know. I just exaggerated the number of guests. Why? Would you have come otherwise? Denise shook her head, not as a negative reply, but at Jackie's misunderstanding. No, why me? What do you want from me? A small frown line formed at the bridge of Jackie's aquiline nose as she appeared to weigh her words. Finally, she opted instead to act. The feather-like kiss caught Denise completely by surprise. You, of course, Jackie whispered when she pulled away. I want you. I've been trying to get your attention for months. Of all the things Jackie could have said, that had to be the last thing Denise expected to hear. It was so far outside the scope of her thoughts that it took several moments for it to register. Her body responded well before her mind, fueling her anger and adding another dimension to her sense of betrayal. When the shock released her vocal cords, she howled with incredulous laughter. It soon had her doubled over, holding her stomach and gasping for breath. Each time she thought she'd gotten it under control, the improbability of the situation would bubble up and the giggles would again erupt. It wasn't until Denise saw the hurt expression on Jackie's face that she was able to stem her laughter. I'm sorry, she dabbed at the corners of her eyes with the backs of her hands. It's just that, well, you wanting me, when you can have just about anyone you choose, male or female, is just too rich. In spite of her resolve, some residual chuckles punctuated her speech. Jackie pushed off the wall and stormed past. Fuck you, she called over her shoulder. Making a beeline for the front door, she threw it open. I think you should leave now. Denise crossed the distance in a few long strides and slammed the door closed a bit more forcefully than intended. Its impact rattled the umbrella stand and knocked over the vase of fresh flowers on the small table nearby, but she barely noticed. I don't think so, she growled, pinning Jackie to the door with her body. You think you want me, eh? We're going to get past perfect and find out. The intensity of their first real kiss surprised Denise with its bruising ardor. She tasted blood, but she couldn't tell if it was hers or Jackie's, and she sucked hard on those fuchsia lips while her fingers wove through the loose blonde locks. Parting the taller woman's legs, she pressed her bare thigh against Jackie's sex, eliciting a moan that vibrated on Denise's tongue. The heat emanating from the worn, threadbare denim caused a reciprocal reaction between her legs, and Denise felt the crotch of her thong grow wet. The harder she pushed, the more enthusiastically Jackie responded. Manipulative bitch, Denise spoke into her mouth. You play people to get what you want. I see it all the time at work. In return, they get to bask in your divine presence for a little while. You turn that megawatt smile on them, make their knees weak. Didn't work with me, did it? That had to bug the fuck out of you. If you want me, you're going to have to learn to be a lot more direct about your desires. She took a step back and reached for the hem of Jackie's sweatshirt, whipping it over her head in one swift movement. Jackie brought her arms down and crossed them over her breasts, eyes blazing. Hands at your sides, now. Denise didn't miss the tiny smirk that teased the corner of Jackie's mouth as she complied, and she vowed to give the woman far more than she bargained for. Taking her time, she studied Jackie's breasts. Perfect, of course. Comfortable handfuls of firm flesh topped with slightly oval, tea-stained nipples that puckered so invitingly. Denise's hands again twitched, but for an entirely, different reason. Yes, they're gorgeous, Denise confirmed the challenge in Jackie's eyes, but you already knew that. Touch them. Jackie nodded. No, not me. You. Put your hands on your tits. Show me how you want me to touch them. Show me how you touch them when you think about me. Her expression went from one of confident defiance to one of apprehension. You must not want me as much as you claim, then. Get out of my way. I'll be going. One fear must have overridden the other, for Jackie's hands slowly traveled up her body to cup her breasts. She paused there, fingertips poised over her hardened nipples. Denise held her gaze until those fingertips began to pinch and Jackie's eyes fluttered closed. When she stopped and opened her eyes, Denise prodded. Keep going. Your hands are mine. Show me, and don't stop unless I tell you to. Jackie leaned against the door and resumed teasing her nipples. Her eyes again closed and her mouth dropped open as the sensations intensified. Fighting the urge to take over, Denise snuck around the corner and grabbed one of the chairs from the dining room. As quietly as she could, not wanting to interrupt Jackie's focus, she parked the chair about 5 feet from the door and straddled it, arms folded atop its back and chin resting on her forearms. She knew when Jackie opened her eyes, she'd have an unobstructed view of her wet panties. Touch your pussy, Denise instructed in a firm but barely audible whisper. Jackie's eyes shot open, fear flashing briefly until rebellion overtook it. I never imagined you'd be the dominant type. Don't give me that bullshit. You're getting exactly what you wanted. The sooner you admit that, the sooner we can stop pissing around and get on with it. Now, put your damned hand in your pants. Stop there.
The story is called The Spy Who.
Who's that?
That's it, The Spy Who. Ellipsis. Ooh.
I love when they ellipsis.
Ellipsis all over your pages. It's a problem I'm trying to stop.
And my beta reader says I use too many ellipses. I've been doing this all wrong.
Well, I supplanted my ellipsis problem with a semicolon problem. It's bad. Don't go down that road, man. Punctuation will kill you.
Gateway drug.
Punctuation is a gateway drug to good grammar. This is it. Her Majesty Nerlina den Bonifaire, Light of the East, Star of the Three Western Towers, looked down into the several times locked chest that had been brought to her private chambers in great secret, opened with particular keys that had been sent by several different messengers, one via a trained pigeon, over the course of as many months, and reached up to scratch her head. Yes, my queen. Her head spy responded from the far side of the chest. His hands slid along the edge of the lid, and, slipping down in to grasp the corners of the cloth within, lifted it out to drape for her inspection. It's a blanket. She bent close, running her fingers over the cloth, as if somehow she might feel beneath her fingertips the message that she had expected to find from their man in Separa. It is. Nerlina looked at him, willing him to tell her different. It is a blanket, he affirmed, drawing it out to lay flat on the bed, and she drifted after him, confused and waiting for it to be made clear. And what is a blanket going to tell us about the progression of Sepadan intrigue, Elanthus? Like any secret, my queen, it must be extracted. He turned toward her as she looked over the blanket in the fading light of day, and for the first time in the long path they had trod together, he broke with protocol, reaching out to brush a dangling curl back from her cheek. With great care. Her eyes slid from the silent blanket to her confidant, her spy, the man who did everything in his power to make sure her position of power remained as solid in the back rooms of royal intrigue as she did herself, and she licked her lips, lifting one hand to push his gently away as she considered him. He had never dared such a thing. Never would have, without reason, she was certain. She was glad. It made closing the space between them all the easier to do, lips melding to lips, hands working together upon themselves and each other to disrobe, piece by piece, in silence. There were no illusions. There was attraction, but this was not love, and there was no doubt in her mind that he had some higher goal in mind. That also did not keep her from enjoying the feel of his skin when it came to be bare beneath her hands, his chest pressing close to hers as his arms wound around her. She felt as if she couldn't breathe, growing dizzied, floating, but that was Alanthus lifting her from her feet and laying them both down together on top of the precious coverlet. They explored boldly. Hands that had worked together in creating coded missives crept over her skin as if she were the legend to a map of treasure. Hands that could, with a gesture, save or take the life of a man, sought out the drumbeat that was the life of this man. Throat, back, hips, thighs. Nothing was left untouched by caress and stroke, and the coverlet gathered and wrinkled beneath them as they shifted and squirmed, now toward each other, and away. Despite the urgency she'd felt to decipher the message of the rich amaranthine blanket, Nerlina indulged in the wine of his kiss and the balm of his hand until his finger strayed between her thighs, and found her there seeming to have been laved with a balm already, so awakened was she for him. "My," he whispered, and she silenced him with another kiss before he could finish. For once alone, for whatever reason lay behind it, they were woman and man, and so she arched to press forward against his fingers, welcoming him there. The man groaned, and his fingers, sliding eagerly through the wetness, dipped in to gather more and to spread it along that most tender skin like the fine oils that adorned her after bathing, and then again, withdrawing from her, to spread it along the staff of himself. Gaze sought gaze. A brief nod and a quirking smile were permission, sought and granted. Worming close, his hands slid down her thigh to catch behind her knee and hook that pliant limb over his hip.
That was the last panel.
That was the last panel. Wrong body part. It was she who moved to sink upon him with soughing groan. Inch by wriggling inch she took him in, and he rocked to press deeper, until they were locked in arms and swaying in the sort of dance no ballroom would countenance from any couple, let alone that of a liege and her right hand. Late afternoon light faded on into dusk, their gasping features falling into shadow, and their teeth clenched tight, one and then the other, as the height of it took them like a secret, hidden in the dark of early evening. For a time after they lay entwined, reveling still in silent touch, and the lingering heat they had stoked together, until one fair hand lifted to brush a droplet of sweat from her brow, and she realized that it fell upon the blanket and seeped in. They rose, and she tugged at the blanket, smoothing it in the dark while he fetched a candle, unhurried, and returned to her. Holding out the taper, an oddity came clear. The evidence of their labor together, the sweat of their form, had not simply made shapeless stains, but had darkened further in particular patterns, that after a moment resolved themselves as letters, albeit upside down. "The message," she whispered, staring. "Brought forth by the salt and water of our distraction," he nodded, taking the liberty of pressing himself once more to the bare curves of her. "The sea might have served as well, I must admit." He trailed off and dared brush his lips upon her shoulder. "Not nearly," she declared quietly, and took the taper from him, fingertips brushing anew over the rich cloth as she began to read. Thank you.
I'm going to read from a chapter in my book, The Lust and the Lair. And before I start reading, Let me put this here. I want to give you a glimpse of some covers that I'm thinking about. Okay, that's one. Okay, and covers sometimes, like titles, they sort of come and go until you grasp it. This is another one.
Thank you.
Okay, and this one, even though I love the most,
Ooh.
I don't think I can use. I pulled it off of Pinterest, and I'm trying to find out who it is. Everybody loves it, and I'm thinking, just my luck. This will be first on the New York and I won't have rights over it.
You gotta get
Definitely need to get rights over it.
So what I do is I use this as my carrying around copy.
The get people interested copy.
That's right.
Get that gluteal furrow there. It's happening.
So I'm going to skip to the smutty part.
That's why we're here.
This is
Oh no, smut.
this story is basically about the dance. This chapter is about the dance between Ariel, who's a siren, and David, who is caught in her lair. And he is somewhat trapped in her mountain cabin going through the transformations. It's been going on for several nights and days, but he thinks it's only been one day, one night. So I don't have time to, of course, set it up. So like I said, I'm going to get to the smutty part.
Get right to the good part.
Okay. David couldn't ever recall being so damn pussy-whipped. Ever. Biting down on his lip, his hand moved back and forth along his erection. He strained to locate Ariel through the shroud of blackness engulfing the room. Though he felt her presence right down to his inner core, she remained unapproachable and invisible. Stretching out his arms, he begged, "Baby, come here." He soon felt the cold air sweeping over his body. Yes, she was near. "I'm sorry, baby," he apologized, for some unknown reason. "I am here," Ariel answered, not needing David to apologize for needing her greater than she desired him. Slowly she allowed her beautiful nakedness to take form. David's eyes could not grow any bigger, and his need for her almost had him exploding under the sheets. "Don't," Ariel whispered. "I want to taste it." "Shit," David groaned, clenching his fists around his erection. It took incredible willpower not to release himself at that moment. But there she was, his goddess, ready to please him to no end. At the foot of the bed, the accent of Ariel's hips hung on the edge of darkness. With but a thought, she whisked away the covers to reveal the monument of love between David's legs that, in fact, she had created. He had called her his goddess, and her eyes sparkled with appreciation. She had not been so adored with such a lofty title for centuries. Locking her eyes on with David so tightly cradled, she ran her tongue slowly across her lips in anticipation of draining him of every loving drop ready to explode. David's attention feasted on the flashing of Ariel's tongue, making a slow, adulterous caress of her lips. He thought he caught a glimpse of pearly white fang, but chalked it up to his imagination. Unconsciously, he licked his own lips before his eyes fell slightly downward to take in the swell of her cinnamon-plump nipples. He sucked in his lip, biting on them to keep from blabbering like a baby. Further south his gaze traveled. The curve of her form snaked in and out of the shadows as though she were dancing. The tuft of her hair between her thighs glistened in the trickle of the moonlight that refused to be snuffed completely out by the demon blackness. "Damn, woman," David panted. "What are you doing to me? Kill me?" Stepping into the light of midnight that canvassed the cabin room, Ariel's fingers walked a sensuous path up the sensual delight that held her breathless. Yes, she said. Yes, she chuckled, seriously. Then, relieving Davis of the chore of containing his excitement, she placed a simple but lengthy kiss on the head of his crown. Within seconds, her lips glistened with the drops of sweetness. Hold it, she urged. Just an appetizer. David groaned in response, unsure how he could keep from exploding. But Ariel's wish was more of a command than a request, and somehow he did. That's right, love, Ariel mentally stroked David as her lips collapsed around the thickness cradled in his grasp. David had no choice but to surrender his precious substance to her. But for now, she only wanted to taste a little of it. With his transformation not yet complete, she slowly sucked up his succulence while enjoying the power she held over him. David's hips lurched in response to Ariel's craving. He tore at the sheets as she went from licking the top of his dick to it disappearing down her throat. Oh, how he wanted to roll her over on his stomach, spread her legs, pry her cheeks apart, yank her head back, and fuck her mercilessly. Instead, to prevent from displeasing her, he closed his eyes and his finger tore into the mattress. Please, Ariel, he whined, fighting against the supernatural inducement to obey himself and the goddess causing his spine to crack at the same time.
What, my turn?
Your turn, Bernie.
Do the thing, Bernie.
Do the thing.
Do the thing.
All right, I was going to read from a story that I have published that I really like, but I'm so unhappy with the editing job that the editor did to it.
Well, clearly it wasn't my editing.
It was not your editing. It was not Circle Press. It was the one thing that I got published originally from not Circle Press. Mm-hmm. I've had something published through Alessia's imprint, but it was a reprint. So that came through Circle first. So I'm not going to read that because I'm still fucking pissed off that they did to my story.
So what are you going to read?
So I am going to read something that is a work in progress. This is a novella or novel length thing eventually, when I finally have time to write it. The Writer's Quill, the 3-story brownstone sat in the north side of Spruce Street between 12th and 13th, nestled between a juice bar and the yoga studio. This is where Graham did most of his writing, preferring the ambient din of other writers engaged in their craft over the solitude of working from a home office. He said it helped his focus. Of course, there were other benefits. The Writer's Quill was a coffee house, tea room, pub, and restaurant, and occasionally dormitory, as befit a writer's particular needs. It was a community of sorts. Even if it was comprised of individuals all delving deep into their own passions, Lydia didn't mind the endless hours Graham spent at his work, the endless espressos and shots of Jack. It was, after all, where Lydia and Graham had met. The Writer's Quill was as much home as any place else, as comfortable as an old quilt. Except today. Lydia tried to keep the frown off her face when she saw the flyer on the window. 34th Annual Philadelphia Typewriter Show. Second weekend.
You're getting some people excited.
Now it's
here,
porn.
Right?
Now it's porn. Second weekend of November. This is when all the typewriter companies came out with their new models. I should have told you the title. The title is Last Year's Model, which is a Elvis Costello song, or taken from an Elvis Costello song. This is the year when the typewriter companies brought out their new models. The first and second floors would be filled with demo models and local vendors trying to move their excess stock. It always made her nervous. Graham squeezed her shoulders and kissed her cheek. Nothing to worry about. Right. Graham walked through the front door. Lydia put on a smile and followed. The Underwood rep zeroed in on Graham almost immediately. She was new, and Lydia didn't recognize her. A young woman, pretty, in a smart, crisp suit. "Mr. Ellis," she said, almost breathless, "they told me you might make an appearance, but I didn't think I'd be lucky enough to..." She glanced at Lydia. "I'm making a total ass of myself, aren't I?" Graham smiled, ever charming. "Of course not, Ms." He peered at her name tag, obfuscated by the drape of her long blonde hair. The rep let go of his hand, flustered. "I'm sorry, I'm usually much more together than this, but it's not every day you meet your favorite author." She handed Graham a business card and handed another to Lydia. "Camille Leona, Mid-Atlantic Sales. I'm here to represent the new face of Underwood Typewriter Company." "And you want to sell him a new Underwood," Lydia said. Ms. Leona looked momentarily surprised. "When he's ready, I suppose yes, but Mr. Ellis is our best advertisement as to the durability of our product. I mean, what's it been, 15 years he's been using the same typewriter?" 18, Lydia said. 18, and no problems, no complaints?" "Not one," Graham said. He smiled at Lydia. "I think that's fantastic. I mean, whoever heard of a Remington lasting half that long? They're practically disposable." Graham twined his fingers into Lydia's, smiled at her. "We're going to look around a bit and maybe find a corner to get some work done. It's been a pleasure meeting you." The Underwood rep hesitated. I know this is hardly the time, but I was wondering if I could get your autograph." She fumbled through her bag and pulled out a dog-eared copy of, and here I have _title_. Which I really should. Title of book. Title of book. It's the first book of yours I ever bought. I have the hardbound collector's edition too, but this one means more to me. "Of course," Graham said, accepting the book. It was a mess. The spine was broken, and the front cover had been reattached with cracking Scotch tape. He scrawled a personalized note on the title page. With his gold-nipped fountain pen, his signature sprawled expansively across the yellowed paper. "You've just made my weekend," Camille said. She flipped the book open to the dedications page and held it out to Lydia, gazing at her with hopeful eyes. "I know it's weird, but some of us know how much work goes into writing a book." Lydia stared at the yellow paper, at the dedication written almost 18 years earlier, when she and Graham had just met, and he wrote feverishly night and day, finishing a 125,000-word novel in less than 4 months, a brilliant novel, Lydia had assured him, though he remained convinced it was crap up until it won the Stoker Award. To Lydia, without whom this book would not exist. Since that first novel, Graham had dedicated every one of his books to her, not to his ex-wife, or to his current wife. Lydia took a pen from Graham's fingers and scratched her name into the paper, her first autograph, the first time she'd ever signed her name anywhere. It felt weird, liberating in a sense, vertiginous. She took a moment to catch her breath, then wrote 2 more words. "Thank you." Of course, Graham had to ogle the new Underwoods. They were sleek, beautiful, elegant. They even smelled new, fresh as a prom date. He kissed Lydia's cheek. "Just looking," he said. "I can look, can't I?" Lydia didn't answer. She disengaged her hand. "I should leave you alone to look." "I'm not in the market for a new typewriter," he said, then stopped looking at the Underwoods. He laughed and took her hand again. "Okay." They stopped at the Remington stand. The Remingtons were ugly typewriters as a rule, squat and sturdy, rugged as tanks, utilitarian, perfect for war correspondents, nature and travel writers. Need to type up a report from a frontline trench or a mountain peak? Remington was designed for you. Remington could survive conditions that would destroy another typewriter, but they didn't age well. 5 years was a good run for Remington. Lydia felt sorry for them. Smith Coronas were even worse. Their designers aimed for a balance between rugged portability and fashion. This year, they had introduced colors, Several blue and green models sat at the display table. There was one in deep burgundy. Another was hot pink. A girl who looked barely old enough to legally type poked 2 fingers at
Sorry, I had a little something in my throat there. Carry on.
Poked 2 fingers at the pink model's maroon keys. I wonder if she types purple prose, Graham said, loud enough that everyone in the Smith Corona booth could hear. Lydia bit her lip. Let's get some work done. You don't want to miss your deadline. Lydia usually had a glass of wine before work, but the typewriter show always left her too tense. She ordered a vodka martini instead. Graham had his usual cup of coffee and shot of Jack, booked a table on the 3rd floor for the afternoon. The Caskins and Daughter display was nestled in the back corner, behind the bar, by the stairs. A local retailer and repair shop, C&D, sold both new and used typewriters. They handled mid-Atlantic distribution for several smaller European manufacturers like Moya and Talbus, and were local dealers for Underwood, Royal, and Blickensdorfer. Lydia felt as much as heard the catch in Graham's breath. Gary Caskin smiled as he approached, hand extended. You see something you like? Graham shook his head. I'm not in the market, Gary. You know that. But Lydia saw what had caught Graham's eyes. She was small, thin, angular features, pale, freckled skin under a mane of red hair. Not conventionally beautiful like an Underwood or a Olivetti, but striking in a way that Lydia couldn't express. She sat alone, slightly apart from the used models, who chatted in the corner of the booth, and excluded from the company of the new models who posed and strutted in front. She wore a simple white robe, like the used models. Lydia took an involuntary step toward the typewriter. She's a Fox, Caskin said. Never heard of them, Lydia said. The original Fox typewriter company was out of Michigan, Caskin said to Graham. The company closed up back in 1921, but, well, you know, just about all the other typewriter companies went belly up at some point, didn't they? W.F. Fox, great-something granddaughter, reincorporated the company a few years back in Oregon, Portland. They're only distributing in Oregon and Washington so far, but I picked up one of last year's models at a trade show this summer. He pulled the Fox to her feet. She looked sullenly at the floor until Caskins lifted her chin with a finger. She glared at Graham, defiant. Ms. Fox is an idealistic young woman, but she's got a good head on her shoulders. She's incorporated a great deal of original company design concept into their current product line. He slid the Fox's robe off her shoulder. Her breasts were small, high on her chest, with dark nipples. A single hair grew, long and crazy crooked, from her left areola. That was different. Most typewriters Lydia knew shaved obsessively, or plucked or waxed.
Keep reading, I'm trying to be quiet. This makes me so happy.
The Fox is graceful and sleek, opinionated and willful, very responsive to the right touch, I'm told, and performs beautifully, but she's a little feral. She's challenging, but she'll be a great match for the right writer. Want to try her out? Graham tore her eyes away from the Fox and looked at Lydia. No, he said. I'm really not looking for... Oh, go ahead, Lydia said, and downed her martini. I'll be at the bar. But she didn't leave. She watched as the Fox parted her robe and let it slip to the ground, as the Fox lay back on one of the padded writing tables and spread her legs. Her pubic hair was thick red curls that parted with her fingers to expose her clit. Her keys dotted her inner thighs. They were the color of her freckles, of her nipples, and as Graham's fingers brushed them, she shivered. That seemed to surprise the Fox, and she frowned. And then Graham began to type. And I have a thing that says, first line. Type bars sprang from her thighs, character after character striking her ink ribbon clit. And she gasped. Her hands gripped the side of the table in surprise. And I have a little bit that says, bit of his novel. Lydia recognized the words. She saw them slip across the Fox's labia, across her pelvis, peek from under her bush, scroll up from her pubis, filling her belly from hip to hip, as Graham's fingers danced across the fox's inner thighs. But Lydia would have known them even if she couldn't see, knew them from the sound of them, the cadence of molded lead striking ink-wet flesh. She touched a hand to her belly, where the words were still warm from their morning session. The fox was breathing heavily, toes curling. She looked at Lydia for the first time. Her lips moved, silently mouthing words. "I'm sorry." And then her body arched, and she cried out, high-pitched and yes, feral, as the orgasm washed through her. Graham finished his sentence on her quivering thighs, pausing for a moment before typing the final word, the final period. The fox's belly shook. "What do you think?" Kaskin asked. Graham's hesitation was almost so brief that Lydia didn't notice. Almost. "I have a typewriter," he said, "who has been very patient with me today, but we have deadlines to meet." He took Lydia's hand. Together, they climbed the steps to the 3rd floor, and he almost didn't look back.
I'm mad at you.
I am so glad I didn't have
Giving
to
me
follow
typewriter
that.
feels,
Oh
you
my
bastard.
God.
I have to go
Well.
home and type something on my Webster.
Can you cast that? Video cast that?
Me typing?
Yes.
Oh, I'll type for you, baby.
Absolutely.
I mean, it doesn't have to be fun.
Our time is almost up. I'm going to give each of our guests an opportunity to tell you where you can find them online. But first, I'm going to pimp my stuff, and I am Nobilis Reed. You can find my podcast at nobilis.libsyn, Libsyn, libsyn.com. 325 episodes of audio smut.
Yay, smut!
Yay, smut!
I'm Alessia Brio. I'm the publisher of the Coming Together charity.
You just dropped it.
I Need a Drink charity erotica series. You can find it online at eroticanthology.com. You can find my personal work at purpleprosaic.com. That's all.
I am Bliss Morgan. You can find pretty much anything I write either self-pub or through various publishers on Amazon, various reputable and disreputable publishers on the internet. If you want to find me socially, I am Bliss Morgan on Google Plus and Call Me Bliss on Twitter.
Hello, I should say good night. This is way past my day. I'm very much a morning person.
It's almost morning. You'll be fine.
But waking up in the morning. I've published about 16 books. And like I said, this is my first book into fantasy and eroticism. I have several books behind that. You can find all of my work also on Amazon.com. And if you like, I have business cards. My website is sharpebooksonline.com.
And I'm Bernie Mojzes. I'm at kapamaki.com. My magazine is at unlikely-story.com. That, what I just wrote, is not available for purchase at this time because it's not freaking done.
But believe you me, I'm going to start bothering you about it a lot.
Bernie
Bernie.
Mojzes is not your bitch.
But he will be.
But if you're interested in typewriter sex, this is the book to buy.
And what is it for people who are listening to the thing as opposed to here in the room with us?
Listening to
The
what
book.
thing?
He's recording
I'm
the
recording
thing,
this, so
darling.
you
You're right.
tell
Oh,
people
my
the
God.
title of this.
Speak the words, Bernie.
The
Speak
words.
the words.
The book is called
Use
The Flesh
your
Made
right
Word,
words.
Erotic Tales About Writing, and it's erotic stories about erotic writing.
And one of the stories is in my podcast.
And one of
It's very tautologically
pleasing.
pleasing.
Yeah, that.
Yes.
You used the word tautological. in
Yes, I
erotic
did.
panel.
Yes,
love
I
you.
did.
Thank you all for coming. Have a good night. We are done.
All right.
We've seen some
And there you have it. Was it good for you? Tell me what you think by calling the voicemail line, sending me an email, or finding me on Twitter. All those ways to contact me are over on the podcast website at nobilis.libsyn.com. And remember, check out patreon.com/nobilis for how to be a part of making the Nobilis Erotica podcast a paying audio market. You have been listening to the Nobilis Erotica podcast. Theme and incidental music is used under license from Digital Juice. This podcast is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. Until next time, listen hard.